Good morning. My name is Amy Perry, and I am an autism resource specialist for the Autism Society of North Carolina, and I am based out of the Fayetteville office of the Autism Society. This webinar is called the IEP Process, Creating Success for Your Child at School. And I do want to make you aware, we have another workshop on IEPs, and I'm going to give you the information for that. It's also available as a webinar on our website. This webinar is going to go through things you can do to help create success for your child at school, just as it says, to help you maximize the IEP and how to how to prevent problems, and then problems if that ends up being necessary for you. So anyway, um, I'm just going to give you a quick recap at the beginning. I mentioned we do have a webinar on IEP frequently asked questions. So if this presentation today doesn't answer all of your questions, I encourage you to go and check out our webinars page on our website. And we have a lot of great webinars, but in particular, IEP Basics Frequently Asked Questions will cover everything that I don't cover today. A quick way to find that is to Google Autism Society NC webinars. All right. I am going to be sending out a handout that you all should be able to download from the webinar today that will have links to all of the different sites that I reference, program services, those kinds of things. So you will be getting a handout from me as long as you're logged into the webinar. I'll be sending that out at the end, and you'll be able to get that. The other resource I want to direct you to in advance is our resource toolkits. Those are also available on our website. We have one specifically for IEPs, another one on behaviors in the IEPs, and even another one on the transition component as your children are transitioning to it from middle school to high school and then into adulthood. So we have some really helpful guides that you can download, print, read on your computer. So I encourage you to go and check out our toolkits as well. I just want to give a really quick recap in terms of what IDEA and special education is, just so you guys are familiar with what we'll be talking about today. IDEA is the law that provides for special education. It stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It came about in 1976. Prior to 1975, there was no legal requirement for children with disabilities to be educated in schools. The law was sort of revamped or enhanced back in 2004, so you will sometimes see the law referenced to as IDEA 2004, and that is because it is the latest iteration of this law. IDEA is a federal law, so special education benefits are provided at the level of the federal government, and the laws surrounding IEPs are federal laws. So that's just something important that I like families to be aware of. There are three basic principles for special education or IDEA. One is that children are provided with a free and appropriate public education. Appropriate does not necessarily mean best or ideal, and it also must be free. There cannot be conditions placed on the education. A school cannot require that you send a helper with your child to school in order for them to attend. They cannot even require that you attend school with your child. It must be free. All right. They require that students be served in the least restrictive environment in which they can be successful. So at some points we'll be talking about least restrictive environment or free and appropriate education. Also, an IEP is an individualized education plan. So it's based on the unique needs of your child. There isn't one set of services. The IEP team looks at a lot of information and decides what needs to go into creating an IEP to help that child be successful at school. Again, successful does not always mean your child gets straight A's. It means they're able to pass the content. So it's a really common question that I get, so I just wanted to cover it very quickly for anyone who's wanting to know how to request an IEP for the first time. If your child does not have special education services, it's very important that you make the request in writing. Be sure to include the date This starts a 90-day legal timeline in which the school district has to do an evaluation of your child, present the results of the evaluation, and decide whether or not your child is eligible for special education services. Once your child has an IEP, there is no legal timeline associated with different meetings and things that need to occur. But it's very important that parents make the request in writing. Lots of times the request is made verbally, and if you have it in writing, you have legal evidence that that the request was made at a specific date. So make the request in writing. It doesn't have to be super formal or fancy. It can say something to the effect of, my child has a diagnosis of autism, or whatever their diagnosis may be. I believe this may have an impact on their education. I would like to request that they be evaluated for special education services. Sign your name, date it. It can be that simple. There are examples and references to this in our IEP toolkit that I'm going to send you the link to. The next thing I want you to know is that you give the request to the EC case manager of the school. Each school is assigned an EC case manager. They typically serve several schools depending on what your district is, where you're at, and so I recommend them as a contact person because they're responsible for scheduling all of the IEP meetings and special education services in that school. They're the administrator for special education services. So I like for the request to go to them. You could also give the request to the teacher, to the principal, or to the EC director of your county. So those are also options. Sometimes teachers or principals are new or just not as familiar as they need to be, and I've seen requests like this fall through the cracks. So I always encourage parents to give the request to the EC case manager of the school where your child attends. If you're requesting an IEP for the first time, I also recommend that you keep a copy of the request. Remember, it starts a legal timeline. Take a picture of it with your cell phone, whatever you need to do. Write down who you gave the request, gave it to them. Those are all good, important things to do. All right, so if you're looking at an IEP for the first time, I want you to know about that. All right, so the rest of this workshop, we're going to be talking about tools for success. We're going to talk about IEP sheets, or all about me sheets, my bad. All about me sheets are positive student profiles and how one of those can help prevent a ton of problems and strengthen your relationship with the teacher. We're going to talk about the importance of parent-teacher relationships. We're going to talk about creating a paper trail. We will talk about why IEPs fail, and then we'll talk about what to do when you get stuck. All right. So, all about me sheets or positive student profiles are one of my favorite ways to set a student up for success. So many things can be solved by just doing this from the get-go. A great time to do this is at the beginning of the school year, but it is never too late to do this for your child or your student. Maybe some of us have some extra time on our hands, and this would be a good thing to either create or update while we are all spending more time together. Obviously, it's going to depend on the age of your child and what's appropriate for them. It may look very different for young children than it will be for older students, and I'm going to hand out for some examples of some ways you can do this. One of the key things I tell parents is try to keep it to one page and try to use bullet points so that the teachers can look at things at a glance. All right. So we have a fictional child named Carl, just to give you an example. Carl's in the 3rd grade. He's 8 years old. He has one brother and one younger sister. When I grow up, I want to speak Japanese and drive race cars. My favorite thing in school is going to the library to look at books about bugs. At home, I like to watch Godzilla movies in Japanese and play Xbox. I do not like clowns. This summer, I took a gymnastics class. My favorite food is anything with cheese on it. One interesting thing about me is I can touch the tip of my nose with my tongue. Now, we've just given the teacher a whole bunch of information, and it doesn't have to just be the teacher. I want to say that. All about me sheets can be given to teachers, therapists, bus drivers, PE teachers. This is a great way to teach other people who are interacting with your children about them. I like to start off with just things about the child, what makes up who they are, because they are a child. They may live with autism, but there's a lot of interesting things. By starting with interest, this gives the teacher some different ways where they may be able to relate to the child, some things that they're interested in, and just to be aware of some things they don't like. But I definitely start with letting the teacher get to know your child. and things that they enjoy or maybe don't enjoy, or just novel things about them that are simply interesting to know. It is a great idea if your child has any allergies to list those. It is completely optional to list medications. Sometimes parents do that. You do not have to disclose that to the school. But if you like them to know if your child is taking a medication for something, sometimes parents and teachers like to keep in touch in order to know if medications are having side effects, if they're working effectively. So it's anyway, so those are pieces of information that you can add. Um, Continuing with Carl, for academics, Carl says, I usually like school. My strongest subject is reading. I do not like to write sentences. Sometimes I like math. What works? I am very motivated by time tests and races, and I love public praise. Now, there are children who are the complete opposite of this, but this might be something that would be helpful for Carl's teacher to know. What doesn't work? Please don't give me too much work at once. I might shut down. This is also a great thing for the teacher to know about Carl. So even ever before she reads the IEP, she's learning about Carl and things that will and won't work for them, right? IEPs are not always written in this format. And so I encourage parents to share this information up front about your child. Behavior. I am eager to please, but sometimes I am easily frustrated when I don't understand your expectations of me. When this happens, I might kick my desk or break my pencil. I might yell if someone tries to talk to me. What works? Bouncing a ball in a quiet area or listening to music. What doesn't work? Telling me to stop or asking what is wrong. Tips. If I have a meltdown, show me the ball or the headphones. Don't talk. I know what they are for and will pick one to calm down with. How I work best. When I know the schedule and any changes in advance. When I have one task to do at a time. Typing on the computer helps me complete writing assignments much faster. I enjoy working for immediate rewards and small prizes, right? So I think we've actually just learned a lot about Carl, haven't we? We know some things that will work for him. We know some things to avoid. And this could be really helpful information if you're Carl's teacher. I like to encourage parents to put important phone numbers on there. We know the school collects all of this stuff, but having it handy can be a really useful thing for that teacher. So we've got mom's phone number, her email, dad's cell, grandma, important people that we might want the teacher to reach out to in the event that there's a problem. These are just some other guidelines. There's so many other ways to do it. Another format is sort of a letter to my teacher where we say, what is my general disposition? What am I really good at? What do I absolutely love doing? What do I hate doing? What academics are my strong areas? What academics do I need a lot of extra help with? Which skills would my parents really like me to work on this year? How do you know when I'm getting frustrated? What can you do to calm me down before the storm hits? So again, these are just prompts to help you get thinking about what kinds of things you might want to let your teacher know about your child. Continuing on with that, it's too late. The storm hit. Our child maybe had a meltdown. What can you do to calm me down? These kinds of strategies are super important. I know with my daughter with autism, when she's upset, everybody has to stop talking to her. If you say anything to her, it's going to escalate her. And so that's one of the things I've always made sure to tell teachers is if she gets upset, if she covers her ears and her eyes, that's a sign that things aren't going well. And if you try to talk to her, if you say, what's wrong, that's going to make it worse. So knowing things, what typically makes me laugh, or what strategies work really well to get me to do something I don't want to do. What typically makes me laugh? What consequences backfire and don't give the desired results? Or I don't like consequences, but which consequences work well for me? And anything else you would like them to know. So again, this is just a list of things to help spark ideas when talking to someone and letting a teacher get to know your student. It is a very important thing to be an advocate all year for your child. Advocate means to speak for someone. So an advocate is not someone who necessarily starts fights. An advocate is someone who speaks on behalf of someone else. So you are speaking on behalf of your child and their special needs. It's very important to have open communication with the teachers. Provide a communication notebook to send things back and forth. Ask some, a lot of classes use Class Dojo now or Power School or things like that to send messages back and forth to parents. So ask your teacher what's a good way to communicate with them. Some teachers are super great at using the Dojo app or with email. Some teachers will text with parents. Some teachers say call. Some teachers say set an appointment. So ask the teacher what the best way is to communicate with them, because we all are connected in different ways and different levels and different types of technology. So don't assume that handwritten notes or that text messages or emails are even the best way to communicate with the teacher. Ask them what works best for them. You want to make it easy for them. You want to educate teachers about your child's disability. April is Autism Awareness Month. And I tell parents, autism awareness is our responsibility as parents of children with autism. It ultimately falls on us. A lot of people are working to try to help make the world more aware and to better understand autism, and that's part of my role at the Autism Society. But I like for parents to know that autism awareness is also your responsibility. Helping people to understand your child and your needs is part of our role as a parent of a child with autism. Um, there are lists and schedules giving the teacher an example of what works for your child and if what doesn't work at home. Keep in mind that what works at home doesn't always work at school, and vice versa. What works at school doesn't always work at home. Volunteer in your child's classroom or in their school where you can. Be present, be helpful. You want the teacher to understand that you're trying to help them be successful in their job in working with and teaching their child. So I can't stress the importance enough of being a willing and helpful person to the teacher or to the school. Some teachers welcome parent volunteers in their classroom. Other classrooms are not well suited for that, but it can be helpful to volunteer for the school in other ways. You want the more connected you are to your child's school, the more connected you are to your child. And if there's a problem, ideally, the faster you can solve it because you will be familiar with the people and the resources. And hopefully we'll have facilitated good relationships with them. Um, a lot of times something goes wrong and parents think I need an IEP meeting. An IEP meeting is not always necessary. It is completely possible to have a parent-teacher conference. In fact, I had a parent a few years back who said, I didn't know I could have a parent-teacher conference because my child has an IEP. I thought it always had to be an IEP meeting. So she was very relieved to know she, of course, was allowed to go and meet with the teacher and share the concerns, and that it didn't have to involve an IEP meeting with many different people. So parent-teacher conferences tend to be less stressful. They could be less emotional, and they're easier and faster to organize than an IEP meeting. If it's just you and the teacher, that's just two people. An IEP team requires several different members, and it can take longer and it can be harder to organize. So again, having that relationship with your child's teacher and having a parent-teacher conference can be very helpful. I always recommend parents have a parent-teacher conference with the teacher before an IEP meeting. Teachers are often able to share a lot more information in that setting. A lot of people don't think about the fact that when a teacher is in an IEP meeting, they are there with their bosses or their superiors, so to speak. So some teachers don't feel comfortable sharing as much in that environment. When you get them on their turf in their classroom after school, or whatever works for them, you may find that they can share a lot more information. If you're trying to problem solve something with your student and it does not require that the IEP be changed, if we don't need to change the goals, maybe we just need to try a different strategy. Maybe we say, instead of Johnny writing his spelling words, maybe he can type them on the computer. That's an easy thing a teacher can try, and we don't need to have an IEP meeting to make that happen. Teachers are often willing to try different things. If a strategy is successful, we can bring it up at the next IEP meeting. But in the meantime, we maybe have solved the problem a lot faster. Maybe there's some things you want to share about your child that you just want the teacher to know. Maybe like, hey, we're going through a hard time. Grandma or grandpa just moved into our house, or our dog just died. He was really attached to it, and so he may be extra emotional, and I'm concerned about that. So there can be a lot of different things that that you may want to share with the teacher, then it doesn't require an IEP team meeting. It's very common that parents will say, when how if I ask for an IEP meeting or an emergency IEP meeting, how long does the school have in order to schedule that meeting? There is no legal timeline under IDEA, and remember, IDEA is the law that provides for special education. There is no legal timeline other than the law says that the school should meet as soon as can reasonably be arranged. Okay, so if a school calls an IEP meeting, they're required to give a parent 10 days prior written notice that they're having a meeting. There can't be any surprise IEP meetings. Surprise, there's an IEP meeting tomorrow, hope you can make it. They have to give you notice in writing 10 days prior to the meeting. A parent is allowed to waive the 10 days, and sometimes it's helpful to tell a school, I would like to have an IEP meeting as soon as possible, and I am willing to waive my 10 days. Is there any time this week that we could meet? Also, be sure that you need a full IEP team, because you may not. Are we trying to solve a problem, and will it result in us needing to make a change to the IEP, to the services? Sometimes it will, but when it doesn't, you can also have an IEP team conference where we talk about maybe next steps, or what do we need to do? Do we need to consider more services? Do we need to consider different placement? So you can have an informal conference to discuss the student and the IEP, in which we don't make any changes, but we can get the ball rolling in other ways. We can start trying different things to help a student. But that said, just know, if your student has an IEP and you request a meeting, the school is requested to accommodate that within a reasonable period of time, but the law gives no guideline beyond the word reasonable. So I'm sure that's open to interpretation for everyone. But again, that your teacher is your first line of contact in trying to solve and work things out with. If you have specific concerns, if conversations with the teacher aren't always working, I always encourage parents to make the request in writing. If you want to request an IEP meeting, it is a great idea to put that in writing. Ideally, the school meets with you in a reasonable period of time. But if you have made this request and you can say, hey, I requested an IEP meeting 6 weeks ago, why haven't we met? Well, that's significant, because 6 weeks is a really long time. If you make the request in writing, you can prove when you made that request. Always date your communication with the school. Always take a picture of it or keep a copy of it. Email it to yourself, whatever you need to do. If you are requesting an evaluation, that's another time, especially if it's the first time. Remember how we talked about at the very beginning, if your student does not have an IEP and you're making the request, it needs to be in writing. But other types of services, it's very good to get in the practice of putting those things in writing. Lots of things happen because parent will say to teacher, I think Johnny needs an IEP, and the teacher will say, yeah, I think you're right. Maybe we should get him tested. I'll talk to somebody about that. And the parent walks away and thinks, okay, this should work. Well, but what if the teacher forgets? We're all human. These things happen. So by putting it in writing, we've made it official. All right. If you're going to a meeting, you want to restate your understanding of the meeting. We are going to be meeting to discuss testing accommodations for Johnny, or increasing speech therapy services, or whatever change you might be looking at for the IEP. Letter should restate responsibilities and deadlines. I will do this. I understand Ms. Jones will be talking to the EC director about that. These are all good practices. It's also very important to follow up meetings and conferences with a thank you note. Thank you notes are kind of a dying art in our society, and they go a long way in improving relationships between people. So you're going to hear me talk a lot right now about keeping things in writing, and a lot of this comes from Wright's Law. Wright's Law, if you're not aware of it, is a special education website, probably the largest one that exists in our country. Pete Wright is a special education attorney who has argued special education law all the way up to the Supreme Court level. So if we have a guru in our country about special education law, it's Pete Wright. He and his wife have written several books. They do conferences all over the country. Every few years, one of the Rights Law Conferences comes through North Carolina. So I encourage you to keep an eye on that. They do have a list of their conferences around the country on their website, and it's rightslaw.com, rights starting with a W. But Pete Wright says, if it is not in writing, it was not said. If it is not in writing, it did not happen. All right, so if you are trying to work out problems with the school, it's very important that it be in writing. All right, the pen is mightier than the sword. This comes straight from Pete Wright on Wright's Law. If you have a dispute with the school, your contact log is independent evidence that supports your memory. All right, remember, Pete Wright is a special education attorney. He's telling you how to collect the information that you need. So if you have to have a case, that you have what you need in order to advocate or speak on behalf of your child. All right, so if you have a dispute, your contact log is independent evidence. This means it could be used if your situation was not able to be resolved at the basic levels and rose to the level of due process, which is court for special education. All right, so he's telling you these things are evidence. Make your requests in writing. Write polite follow-up letters to document events, discussions, and meetings. All right. Documentation that supports your position is key to resolving disputes early, and your tools are simple: logs, calendars, journals. So we're going to talk about some different ways to do those. All right. And creating a paper trail. Documents provide answers to who, what, why, when, where, how, and explain questions. All right, again, straight from Wright's Law. What services or supports do the school agree to provide? So maybe you have this list of questions when you are in an IEP meeting, and these are notes that you make for yourself, or during the meeting, after the meeting. These are things that you want to write down. Remember, down for you, they become independent evidence if they need to be. What services or supports did the school refuse to provide? What reasons did the school give for their refusal? A lot of times schools will say, we can't do that. And parents, I said, well, why couldn't they do it? I don't know. Sometimes a school will be foolish and will say, we can't do that. We don't have the money for that, or we don't have the staff for that. Well, IDEA, Special Education Law, which is a federal law, remember that, says that schools are not allowed to use money as a basis for denial of services. Now, that does not mean you can have anything you want. If a team agrees that a student needs a particular service or whatever it will be, then they have to provide it. Now, who is the IEP team? It's not just the school, all right? Parents are 50% of the IEP team, and that's an important takeaway that I want you to always remember. You are half of that team. It is easy to feel like you are sometimes just one person, but the law is set up that you are 50% of the IEP team, and the school, the school being the teacher, the special education teacher, the principal, or someone at management level of the school district, they are the other half of the IEP team. They're still only 50%, all right? If the team cannot come to an agreement, 50-50, they don't have the ability to outvote each other. There are different processes that the law provides for that both sides must follow in order to resolve a difference, and that's something that we're going to talk about at the end of this meeting, okay? But a school is not allowed to say, we don't have the money for that, especially if the team agrees this is something a child needs. Now, you may say, I want my child to have a pony at school. Well, again, the team has to agree that they need that in order to do those kinds of things. So anyway, this is an important piece to know. We need to know what did the school give for the refusal. They need a reason other than money or lack of personnel, which translates to lack of money, in order to refuse something that a child needs. Who attended the meeting when the decisions were made? Keeping a list of attendance is part of the IEP that everyone has to sign at the end, but it's important to know who was in the meeting. If someone left early, it's important to note that. The school should be noting that, but I'm teaching you to keep good records. Why was the parent not advised about the meeting if for some reason you weren't, or there's something surprising happening about the meeting? When was the meeting held? When did the parent receive the IEP in the mail? If for some reason a meeting was held without a parent that's another common question is, can the school have an IEP meeting without me? So what the law says is the school must make every effort to include or involve the parent, including the parent can participate by phone or by video chat or something like that. Schools are often willing to meet after hours if there are special circumstances. Employers are required to let parents off. IEP meetings fall under FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act. So according to the government, employers are supposed to let parents off of work in order to attend IEP meetings. I believe there's a certain number of days, so don't quote me, maybe 4 days a year, parents are allowed to leave work and handle these kinds of things when necessary. So just be aware of that. If you have an employer who has a hard time being flexible, they should be letting you off to attend IEP meetings if needed. So if the school makes every effort, if they call, if they send letters, if they do all kinds of things to try to let you know and you do not respond, the school is allowed to continue without you. Or if you say, I don't want to come, they are allowed to continue without you. What do you do if something happens, everything gets lost in the mail, you never got a phone call, and an IEP meeting happens without you? You call another IEP meeting. You say, what decisions did you make? Either you agree with them or you don't, and you can talk about changes. There's not a limit to the number of IEP meetings that can be held during a year. I tell parents, you can call an IEP meeting every single day. Please don't, and I don't think they would meet with you every single day, but there is not a limit to how many times an IEP team can meet. So if you find that an IEP has happened and you were not present, you can meet with the team again anyway, or not again, but you can meet with the team anyway. You can review the decisions that were made. You can give input on those decisions. You can make requests for things to be changed or to be added. And that's absolutely your right as a parent to do that. So it is never too late. If you make decisions in an IEP, you didn't know what you were doing, you can always go back to the table and change it. IEPs are not written in stone. They are living, working documents, and they can always be changed. All right. So anyway, when we're talking about paper trails, Wright's Law gives some great examples on how to create paper trails. One is to create a log for a telephone call, and I will be sending out the document at the end. The handout at the end will have links to the pages where all of these things are on Wright's Law, so you can create versions for yourself if you want to. But here's an example of how you would log a telephone call. All right. Who did we talk to? Emily Jones, the guidance counselor, and we listed her phone number. When? We put the date and the time that we talked. What you wanted. Requested information about accommodations that Mark will receive when he takes the state achievement test next week. What were you told? Mrs. Jones will put the information in an envelope and I will pick it up at the school after 4 p.m. tomorrow. Okay, that sounds simple enough, right? Why would you even need to write that down? Well, what if you never got the information? What if the school didn't have it? What if it never did get sent home? But Mrs. Jones said, well, when did she say? What did she say? Well, you've already written it down. There you go. All right. You see how easy that was? Logging a problem. All right. So who did we talk to? Dr. Matthews, the assistant principal. When did we talk? We see the date and time. What you wanted. He left a message on my office voicemail to advise me that he suspended Chris from school again. What you were told. I did not speak to him. I called him at school 3 times today. He did not return my calls. This is the 3rd time Chris has been suspended since school started 3 weeks ago. All right, so this is significant, especially because you've called him 3 times and he didn't return your calls. So he called and left a message, but he hasn't gotten back to you. It's important to document this, right? Here's an example of a log to document a meeting. Who met? It was a meeting with Mrs. Smith, the social studies teacher, about Joey's grades and the need for accommodations. So looks like a parent-teacher conference. Not everything has to be an IEP meeting. Again, we've logged the date and the time. What you wanted. I want Mrs. Smith to provide the accommodations in Joey's IEP. What you were told. She is stressed out because she has 15 special ed kids and no help. She doesn't believe in accommodations. She says they are unfair to other kids. Notes, Joey is failing social studies. So Now we have a documentation of meeting with a teacher and saying that she doesn't feel like she should provide the accommodations in the IEP. Well, again, that IEP and those accommodations are protected by federal law. Remember that? That's how we started talking about IDEA as a federal law. So that IEP is protected by federal law. It is not optional. These are not suggestions. If a modification or an accommodation is in an IEP, it must be followed by the school. All right. So documenting conversations like this can be very important pieces of information when advocating for your child. So um, this is taken straight from Wright's law in terms of his tips of using the problem report to resolve problems. And he almost writes it like it's a little advertisement or a commercial for the problem report. Do you have ongoing problems with the school? Despite your attempts to resolve the problems, nothing changes. Does the school send your child home or suspend him frequently? Do other students bully your child at school? Is the teacher refusing or failing to implement the IEP? Do you have concerns about your child's IEP? And using low-tech tools to create paper trails, you'll learn how to use the problem report to document ongoing school problems and your attempts to resolve these problems. The problem report provides answers to who, what, why, when, where, how, and explain questions. When the problem occurs again, fill in the problem report and return one copy to the school, retaining one copy for your child's file. Your problem report will become part of your child's file. If the problem occurs again, fill in another problem report and send a copy to the school. Each time you send another problem report to the school, you are creating a paper trail that may help resolve the current problem and protect your child in the future. Ooh, do you see what he's getting at? So here is an example of the problem report worksheet. Again, a link to this will be in the handout that I send at the end. So let's go back and look. Thinking about the problem report in that way, what if this was the problem report that you filled out about the social studies teacher? I want to look at some aspects of this. Is this problem report an angry letter? Does it say anything negative about Mrs. Smith? This is just the facts, ma'am, right? We're not documenting how we feel about that. We're documenting facts. You wanted Mrs. Smith to provide the accommodations on the IEP. Factual, okay? Mrs. Smith says she's stressed out because she has 15 special ed kids and no help. Probably very true, also completely factual. Are we saying anything negative about Mrs. Smith? No, this is what she told us. She also said she doesn't believe in accommodations and says they are unfair to the other kids. We are not documenting our opinion about this. This is simply something we were told by Mrs. Smith, right? Another fact, Joey is failing social studies. So here we have it. If you were the principal of a school and you got a copy of this problem report, or you were the teacher and you saw this in black and white, I might sit up and pay attention. I might feel a little bit uncomfortable if I was Mrs. Smith. I might want to try to find another way to work this out when I realized that this parent was writing this stuff down and keeping a record of it. All right. I tell parents to think about if the school has a problem with your child, if there is disciplinary action, if something is wrong, truly seriously wrong regarding your child and school, how do they communicate that? They usually send you a letter. If your child is suspended, they have to give you a letter. If the school takes any action, there is paperwork that goes along with it. They are required to do this. Why? Because they are professionally taught to establish a paper trail. You are doing the exact same thing. You are establishing a paper trail to protect your child, to gather information about what's going on and maybe what's going wrong. Why? So that you can solve it, so that your child can be successful. So again, here is a super simple example of a problem report worksheet. It's super easy to create a version of this yourself and to jot this down in a notebook, a journal. You can type it up in Microsoft Word. It doesn't really matter. But creating something like this to document concerns or problems at school, sharing them with the school. If the school comes back to you and says, oh, you got it wrong, that's not exactly what happened, that's okay. We can update and amend these problem reports, but this is you trying to collect data in order to help solve the problem, sharing with the school the information you have or that you know. All right. Data is your best friend. Keeping track of this information is your ace in the hole. All right. But you've got to document it on a regular basis, because the more things go wrong, the more emotional we become and the more our memories fail. So get in the habit of documenting these things. You not only want to document them when everything is going wrong, this is when most of us start doing it, you want to document when things are going right. Why? What if they're going right for the first half of the year, and then the second half of the year, everything goes down the drain? We have a completely different problem. If the school starts saying, we've been having with this problem with Johnny all year, I'm like, well, actually, according to my notes and my records, every time we talked between September and December, you told me how great Johnny was doing. You're not just relying on your memory, you actually wrote it down. Talked to Mrs. Jones in the carpool line today. She said Johnny had a great day. Sometimes teachers will have planners or notebooks that they send home. I encourage parents, take a picture of that, right? Snap a picture with your cell phone. Kids lose these things. It's an object. It can disappear. So you don't want to lose these things. So get in the habit every month, go through, snap a picture of your child's planner. If things are good, that's great. You can prove they were good. If there's problems, we've got a running log of the problems. But keep these records. Lots of teachers communicate through Class Dojo. Take a screenshot, email those screenshots to yourself so you've got a log of conversations on Class Dojo. Record the good and the bad, the positive and the negative. This is all information and evidence that tells you what's happening with your child. This could all be very useful information when trying to solve problems in the future. So we talked about the problem report not being emotional, and your homework from this workshop today is to go to Wright's Law and read Letter to the Stranger. If you've ever had to write a letter to the school or been tempted to and wanted to make sure that it hit its mark and yet came across in the right way, right? I can't recommend Letter to a Stranger highly enough. It's an article written by Pete Wright, and he does a great job at showing you how to write an effective letter to communicate your concerns. He also gives you an example of the letter not to write and shows you the difference between the two. But he sets it up like this. When you write letters to the school, these letters will be read by strangers. Many important decisions about your child's education are made by strangers. What impression will your letter make on a stranger? Will the stranger see you as an angry, negative complainer? Or will the stranger see you as a rational, thoughtful parent who's expressing valid concerns? When you write letters, keep this stranger in your mind's eye. Who is the stranger? What does he look like? How does he think? For this example, the stranger is an older person who's worked hard all his life. He's conservative, fair, and open-minded. He knows that life is often difficult and unfair. He doesn't have any patience with complainers. He's more likely to be sympathetic to people who have a plan to solve their problems. He dresses casually. When he sits down to read your letter, he sips a cup of tea and lights his pipe. The stranger doesn't know your child or your situation. Your letter is your chance to sell the stranger on the justice of your cause. You should describe the problem and tell the stranger what needs to be done to make things right. All right, so like I said, this is a fantastic article and writing exercise to help you understand how to write an effective letter that hits its mark. Because while angry letters in the moment can be very satisfying, we think that they're satisfying, they often distract us from what we're really trying to accomplish. All right. So remember, just the facts, ma'am or sir. Logs, journals, and reports and letters to the school are not the place to document your feelings and frustrations about the situation. It is completely valid to have frustrations and strong feelings and emotions. I don't think there's anything closer to a parent's heart than our child. We would all take a bullet, step in front of a bus. We were mama bears and papa bears. We will do anything we need to protect and care for our children. So recognize that your child is often an emotional topic for you, especially if something is wrong. I love that song, when something is wrong with my baby, then something is wrong with me. All right. So remember that our level of emotionality when talking about problems with our children is often much, much higher. And we need to be very careful about that. It's fine to express your feelings, but expressing your feelings and your frustration to the school is not going to work towards solving the problem for your child. This is why we have family members. This is why we have parent support groups and chapters and all of these kinds of things. There are appropriate places to do this. We do not recommend that you take all of your frustrations out on social media and tell everybody what's going on and what horrible people in the school are. This does not serve well to solve the problem. Nobody wants to get into a social media war, so please be very careful and use discretion when communicating about frustrations when your child's school in places like social media, all right, because it often doesn't serve well, and you never know in social media who knows who. So be careful. Um, so scream all you want, because sometimes, and myself included, have had many times where I really not only felt like screaming, I did scream um, in my house or in my car. But emotional arguments with the school are not productive. These are the people who will spend all day with your child, and you are asking for their help. Your child's teacher or people at the child's school are not people that you want to make your enemies. Remember, the reason you're in the situation is you want them to help your child. All right. It can be very frustrating, but um, you're asking for their help. I went to an IEP meeting several years ago with a family, and there was a tense relationship between the parent and the teacher. And the parent, up until a certain point, had been calm, rational, had her paperwork together, had outlined her concerns, and something happened. And I looked, and the parent had stood up and leaned over the table and had her finger under the teacher's nose and said, "Wipe that look off your face right now." That really surprised everyone. I hadn't noticed that the teacher had had a particular look on her face, but I know that as adults, that's or even as children, that's not something we like to have done with us. So the parent was clearly very frustrated, um, but that did not help to necessarily move the situation forward. So think about how you're interacting with the school. You want to avoid emotional language. You don't care. You never do this. You always do this. You want to see my child fail. You're trying to drive me crazy. These are all valid feelings, but school meetings, IEP meetings, letters to the school, these are not places where you want to vent. You want to be taken seriously. So I'm teaching you how to be taken seriously, and the number one rule is you must keep emotion out of it. It must be factual. If you have done your due diligence, if you have kept your records, your facts, your logs, your notes, all of these will be all you need. Your feelings are valid, but do not use strong feelings to advocate for your child. I have seen it backfire in countless situations. So please be careful. um, when communicating with the school, that you keep it factual. We've just talked about paper trails and keeping records. Organize your documents and keep a file that you can take to meetings. Do not leave an IEP meeting without copies of all forms, meeting notes, evaluations, anything that was discussed at the meeting. You do have a right to view your child's school records, and you may need to ask for an appointment to do that. That would be with the EC case manager of the school, and you can request copies of your file. The law says the school does have a right to charge you a reasonable fee to have a EC folder copied. Sometimes if our kids have been in a lot of school for a long time, those folders are quite large, so the school can charge. I have always told parents, stop by Walmart, grab a ream of paper and bring it with you and offer to donate it to the school, since you know that they'll be making a lot of copies. I've never had a parent, I know it does happen, but usually if a parent does that, nobody's told me the school has charged them. But I will tell you, the school does have a right to charge. Try to work it out with them in another way if you can. Um, But I want to go back up to my first point in terms of keeping keep a file or a notebook or a binder or whatever you need to, an accordion file that you can take to meetings. One of the most important things in walking into an IEP meeting is looking like you are prepared for that meeting. You're there to be taken seriously, right? You're speaking on behalf of your child and their needs. Look prepared. All right. Be prepared, but also look prepared. I teach a different workshop on creating an IEP notebook for your child. How do you keep all of these documents and papers together? What's important? How different tips and tricks for organizing it and all of that. So um, I highly recommend watching our calendar for that when that comes out, because we do that a few times a year. So anyway, but when I go into an IEP meeting, I have about a 4-inch binder and I have all of my daughter's documents in there. And it's amazing the response that that gets. I go to a lot of IEP meetings. I cover 10 different counties in my job. Parents who show up to IEP meetings with notebooks or binders or files about their child, who have all of the records, who have copies of all of the communication, these parents get treated differently. And I see it all the time. I may see kids with have similar needs, but when parents come with documentation supporting their request for their child, they get treated differently. And often they walk away with better services simply because they're prepared. I had a parent who, we were at the IEP meeting, and every time the teacher or somebody in the meeting would say something like, I don't think Johnny really has a problem with this, she would pull out a piece of paper. She had work samples, she had everything. She would pull out a piece of paper to the contrary and say, well, this is why I made this request. Oh, right? She had them. Oh, we don't think this is really necessary. Well, this is came from the list of suggestions that the school speech therapist made when she evaluated him. So I was thinking that you would do what your speech therapist recommended. Oh, you're right. So she had pulled out maybe 3 or 4 pieces of paper, and the next time a request or a dispute came up, she opened her notebook again to get another piece of paper. The principal stood up, politely leaned across the table, gently placed his hand on the notebook, and said, you don't need to show us anything else. I get it. I understand you. Just tell us what you want us to do. Because this mom was prepared to the T. And in that particular situation, she was able to advocate effectively for her son using the evidence that she had collected from the school based on conversations with school staff, based on work samples she collected from her son, and based on the evaluations that the school and other professionals had done for her son. All right, so do not underestimate the value of showing up with your documentation together. They pay attention to that stuff. You may never need to use it. You may never open the notebook, but bring it. I like to recommend that parents get a big notebook that you put a nice picture or a collage of pictures, one of those school 8x10 glossies, whatever it is, put that in the front of the notebook. Get one of those notebooks that has the little plastic insert. It's a great way to keep you grounded. It's a great way to remind everyone else that this is a child, that this is who we're here for, right? Because sometimes even the best of us can lose sight of that. So I think there's nothing more important than remembering that this is about a child for everyone that's in the room. So make an IEP notebook. We've all got some time right now, so try to use it. You want to be supportive to the school. Provide information about your child's disability. Provide information about your child. Remember when we just talked about the IEP, the All About Me sheets at the beginning? You want to offer to volunteer at the school. Work collaboratively to solve problems and find solutions. Ask the teacher what would be helpful. Donate snacks, supplies. It's really hard for a school or a teacher to fight with a parent who's helping them out. Have you ever tried to do that? Have you ever tried to fight with somebody or be less than polite maybe with somebody who's helping you out, who's donating cookies to your classroom, who's volunteering in the school library? Have you ever tried to be awful to someone who does that? It's hard. It's really hard. So, building that relationship with school is a very important thing. Let the school know you. Let them know your child. Maybe you're working, you can't go and volunteer. But again, making sure the teachers say, "Do you need anything for your classroom? Can I donate anything? Is there anything I could do over the weekend? Could I cut out supplies or materials for you, or something like that?" Asking the teacher how you can help um, is a great way to help build that relationship. So, what about IEP meetings? Let's talk about why IEPs fail. There are two common reasons why I see IEPs not be successful. The first is they aren't written correctly. If the goals do not reflect the needs of the child or the expectations of the parents, we're not going to be happy with the outcome, right? We want to have measurable goals, and I encourage you to check out our other IEP workshop where we talk more about what a measurable goal is. But a measurable goal would not be Johnny will improve his math skills. Well, what is improve, right? um, that could be different. He could move forward, one math level. Well, you wanted him to move forward 1 year's level. So we don't want to say just improve. We want to be specific. Johnny will improve his math skills to this level or by this many levels by this date, right? We can measure that. Excuse me. All right. We say math skills. Well, which math skills are we talking about? Are we talking about addition, subtraction, multiplication, division? We need to have specific measurable goals. So we often feel like an IEP isn't working if the goals aren't written correctly. Sometimes the evaluations and the testing may be out of date. School districts are required to consider testing students who receive special education services every 3 years. All right. I always recommend that parents have their student reevaluated. I like to say, are you dressing your child in clothes that they wore 3 years ago? No. Well, one of the things we don't realize is that IEPs are built on previous data from previous evaluations. Again, we're parents, and so we don't always see the inner workings of this, but I'm talking to you today to tell you that the data from those old or previous evaluations are a big piece in what's driving that IEP. If we're using old, outdated information, we're going to have a problem. If a child was evaluated at 3 and they're now 10 years old in the 4th grade, wow, we're using really outdated information. Kids change a lot. Even neurotypical kids have changed a lot between 3 and 10. So every 3 years, the team is required to at least offer or consider doing an evaluation. I'm telling you, do that evaluation. When I get involved with a situation with a family and there's a problem, that's the first thing I want to see the IEP, and after that I want to see the testing, and I want to see how old it is, and did we do the right test? Did we do enough testing to have the information that we need about this child and their disability? If we didn't, well, then we need to request the testing, or if the testing is out of date, we need to do that so that we can make good, solid decisions about what this child needs. That testing is one of the main ingredients in an IEP. We're parents, we're not seeing what's happening beside the scenes, but I'm telling you, this is what drives the IEP, is the data in that evaluation. So every 3 years, that evaluation should be happening, okay? Sometimes we don't have the right testing. We haven't obtained enough input from enough people, or there was not enough data available at the time, right? So it's not that people aren't doing their job right necessarily, but if an IEP isn't written correctly, it's not going to be helpful, right? Um, so the second reason why an IEP might fail is that they aren't implemented correctly. Now, again, I'm not trying to say this is not a teacher not doing their job, all right? The current teacher may not have been present when the original goal was written, and they may misunderstand the intention of the goal. IEPs cycle 1 calendar year, and they can involve more than one teacher or school. So a lot of times a teacher is inheriting information from another IEP teaming, another school, maybe even another district, and they weren't there when these goals and modifications and accommodations were written. So it's a little bit like the game of telephone. They may be misunderstanding that. All right. One of my favorite examples of this was an IEP meeting I was at many years ago, in which the parent was quite sure that they were not following the IEP. Actually, I think it was part of the BIP, the Behavior Intervention Plan. And for those of you who don't know, if your child has a behavior intervention plan, it becomes part of the IEP, and it is legally binding and protected by federal law, just like an IEP is. And we have an IEP and behavior intervention toolkit on our website. Again, that's in the handout I'll be sending out at the end. Okay, so this child had a strategy in their behavior intervention plan that they would do a calming dialogue when the student began to become upset. And initially I thought, okay, do a calming dialogue. But with all the conversation the team was having, we still weren't solving it. So I finally pushed pause and I said to the teacher, Mrs. Smith, has anyone ever talked to you, like when you got this IEP, did anyone tell you what this calming dialogue should look like? And she said, well, no, I guess they didn't. I'm like, okay, are you doing the calming dialogue? Yes, I am. I'm doing the dialogue. I'm like, tell me what that looks like. So she says, well, I rub his back. I tell him, to just write the first letter, that take his time. I tell him it's going to be okay. I say calming things to him. It says calming dialogue, so it sounds like I'm supposed to calm him down. I agreed with Mrs. Smith. This sounded a perfectly rational example of a calming dialogue. And so I turned to Mom and I said, Mom, you're the only one who was at that last IEP meeting from the other school. Do you know what the calming dialogue was? And Mom said, yes. And she had kind of a funny look on her face. I'm like, what did they do for the calming dialogue at the other school? And she said, oh, well, Mr. Jones used to take him out in the hall and they would do breathing exercises. That was the calming dialogue. Like, well, wait a minute. We have a failure to communicate, right? So I can agree, sure, breathing exercises or meditation or something out in the hallway is good, but the plan was not specific enough. So was the teacher following the BIP? Of course she was, to the best of her ability. Was the BIP written specifically enough? Absolutely not. It didn't have enough information. So when I say something isn't implemented correctly, it's not to indicate that the teacher isn't doing their job. It's to point out the fact of human fallacy that we don't always understand each other perfectly, that we are all guilty of making assumptions, right? And what we really have to go back to is that foundation of communication. I also like to give the example, I could sing the Star Spangled Banner for you, but I can guarantee that you wouldn't like it, and that you could also argue that I'm not implementing it correctly, right? My voice is not able to hit all of those notes. I'm not even sure I know all the words, right? So I could sing the Star Spangled Banner, but how accurately and appropriately I could do it, I'm not truly trained to do that. Thank goodness for all of you. So that's another example of something not being implemented correctly. Sometimes it really is just human error or miscommunication why these things happen. So keep that in mind when you're trying to solve these problems, is that the teacher truly understand what this should look like. We are all human. um, and we're all doing the best we can. So anyway, remember, miscommunication can be a big factor. It's also completely possible that a child has outgrown a goal. Sometimes our kids with autism, if something is too easy for them, they just won't do it. And a teacher who doesn't understand that will think they can't do it, and they will keep presenting things, and they'll go lower and lower in the levels trying to get the child to comply, when actually the child can work far above that level and they just won't do work that they think is baby work. So we have to make sure we know, has a child outgrown a goal? If a goal is too old, if it's not, doesn't fit the child, it's not going to work. Another question we can ask is, would a teacher benefit from additional support and instruction from the EC department? Special education teachers have the exceptional children's department. Every county has program specialists that have gone to additional training, and that is their role to support teachers. So you can get in contact with me if you're interested in who the autism program specialist might be for your county. You can call your EC director, go to the school's website and try to figure out who are the people in my school district who may have special training in autism who are available to support teachers who are serving students, who may be serving my student. All right. So remember, nobody knows everything, and sometimes teachers need additional training. That's not a bad thing. This is just, again, part of life and being a professional. Additional training is available to them through the school district, and even if necessary through the state of North Carolina. All right, so there are teacher trainings available, workshops, conferences, virtual things. There are a ton of materials that are available to help and support teachers for the asking. So I'm a big proponent of helping teachers get the information and training they need. Sometimes you get a teacher, it's their first year teaching, or it's their first year teaching autism. Their area of expertise may have laid elsewhere, and now they find themselves in a class with students with autism, and it's not quite what they were expecting. Making sure that teacher is able to get advocating for the district to provide that professional support for that teacher is a very important thing. So now let's say we're in an IEP meeting, all right? We need to separate the people from the problem, right? If we focus on, you're not doing your job, you're not doing the calming dialogue, you don't care about my child, would we ever be able to solve that situation? No, we wouldn't, all right? So we have to separate the people from the problem. We have to focus on our interests and not positions. We have to ask questions. When I go into an IEP meeting, my biggest tool I use is questions. I ask a lot of questions. I don't do a lot of telling. I do a lot of asking questions. One of the reasons behind that is when we think about human nature, whose idea do we like the best? I like my ideas. How about you? You probably like your ideas. So we have to understand that about human nature. So when we ask people to give us information, well, then theoretically we're getting it from a credible source. If a principal says this is the way this is, if I ask a question to the teacher and the teacher gives me that information, I may be able to use that information later in the meeting in order to make a point. I don't have to make an accusation and say you did or didn't do this. I can say, well, at the beginning of the meeting you told me that this was one of your problems or that this was one of your concerns about this student. So what are some things that we could do to address this concern? And then I love to see, a lot of times I'm very pleasantly surprised when I phrase it like that. What can you guys do to help this student? They're not making progress. What haven't we tried, right? I don't go in and say, you need to do this and you need to, and the law says this and the law says that. Number one, nobody likes that. Number two, they often have resources and brainstorm ideas and things they could do that are far better than anything that I could ever dream up with. So I like to go in asking lots and lots of questions and then using the information they gave me to then help solve the problem. I like to give them just enough information and then say, well, how can we solve that? Johnny's not getting his work done. What are some other things we can do? Hopefully they throw out something that's a viable answer that mom thinks, okay, we could try that. We could work on that. So you want to encourage creative thinking before choosing an option or a strategy. One of my favorite things to say is, okay, so mom would like little Johnny to be in the second grade class for part of the day so that he can have times for tears with his peers. What are some things that we could do? When is a good time in second grade that Johnny could visit? Is there an activity that he likes? Is he super good at math and he'd like to be in math class? Or he might enjoy eating lunch with them or going to the playground with them. What are some things that we could do? Mom, what are you hoping to accomplish with this? If the school is saying no, 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 we'll say, okay, so what are the barriers? What would make this not possible? What are the things we can do to address it? So really we're talking them through solving this problem. And sometimes when we all walk through it together, when we all ask questions, and we answer a question with another question, sometimes we're able to find a path where we don't think there is one. All right. So we do want to insist on objective measurement of goals. Forgive the typo there on my slide, but we want an objective measurement of goals. We don't want Johnny to just improve. We want to know that they're actually making the progress that we want them to make. So like I said, persuasion can be more effective than demands. Your relationship with the teacher and administrators is vitally important, and people are more interested in the success of a plan when they have helped to develop the plan. All right, so this is incredibly important. And I have seen parents get attorneys and take them to IEP meetings and strong arm or make schools put things in. It's totally possible to do that, but I have yet to see a super happy outcome. If the school gets forced to do something by an attorney, if you were forced to do something by an attorney in your home or at your job, how would you feel about doing that? Would you do that with a happy heart or would you be like, I'm going to do this because otherwise I'm going to get in trouble, right? This is not the attitude that I want for people who are working with my child. So remember that forcing somebody to do or to not do something is not always in our best interest. Just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it, right? So remember, you want to develop this plan with the school. You want the school to understand your concerns, understand your child's disabilities and needs, and then we work together to try to work this out, all right? So when an IEP team cannot agree, all right, these are the steps that we're going to talk about. They must document it on a form. It used to be called Deck 5, prior written notice, but it's at the end of the IEP. I'm sure a lot of you are aware that North Carolina has changed over from an IEP database system called SECUS to a new one that's called ECATS. That is far outside the range of this webinar, but there's recently been a change in the program they use to store their data. So some of the names you will find that the IEPs look a little bit different. Sometimes things are in a different order, and so it's still the same IEP. It's just the program and the software that they're using is slightly different in the state of North Carolina. So anyway, so if the team cannot agree, that needs to be documented in the IEP. There's specific questions that talk about, is there something that the team did not agree on, all right? You do have the option for a facilitated IEP. You have the option to go through mediation with a mediator with the school district. You have the option to file a state complaint, or you have the option to go to due process, which will require an attorney. All right, so I'm going to talk through a couple of these options with you. I do want to recommend that you guys check out this video that's done by ECAC. This will be in the link that I'm sending in the handout out at the end of this webinar. But ECAC is another North Carolina statewide organization that advocates for children with all special needs. So maybe you know someone or you have another child who has an IEP or a disability, but it's not autism, and you still need help. ECAC is a very good resource for parents. They help parents with children with all different disabilities. At the Autism Society of North Carolina, you guessed it, our focus is primarily on autism. So I recommend that resource there. If you look up ECAC IEP team process chapter 5, that one in particular is very good at talking about the IEP meeting, the roles of the people there, and how to advocate effectively. So I just want to recap a little bit as we go into these next things. When you have a dispute in the school, I absolutely love this meme that says, but it's in his IEP. I have felt that way many times. Sometimes I still do when I'm working with parents. But remember, be calm, polite, and thoughtful. Show appreciation. Write thank you notes. Write the angry letter or talk to someone neutral first, and then communicate with the person involved. Be organized, keep records, put your requests in writing, okay? And you want to be flexible. Flexibility and compromise can go a long way in negotiations. One of my favorite things is when a parent's trying to request something and the school is pushing back to say, can we try this for 2 weeks or for 1 month? Take data on it. We'll just do it on a trial basis. You don't have to put it in the IEP. The school loves that. They don't, then their feet aren't held to the fire. Then they have some flexibility, because when it gets put in the IEP, it's legally binding. Sometimes we're not ready for it to be legally binding. Sometimes we don't know if Johnny is going to enjoy going to math class with the second graders. That may backfire. And guess what? If we put it in his IEP that he goes to second grade math every day, and he hates it and he screams the whole time there, if it's in his IEP, he has to go and he has to scream until we take it out of the IEP. Nobody wants that. Let's make sure it's a good idea first, especially if we're trying something, okay? So sometimes we can say, let's try this, take data on it. If this is working and going well, we can talk about putting it in the IEP. If it's not going well, let's figure out what's not working about it. Are there some new skills or areas we should target to help him be more successful in this area in the future? All right, so use it as a data collection tool. Use it to build the IEP in the future. If something doesn't work, I want to know why, because we don't want to miss the opportunity to help provide support or training or education to a student in that kind of situation. So if you get stuck with the IEP team, you need to ask, do we have enough data to make a good decision? What other data or information do we need? Schools are encouraged to take data called ABC data, all right? ABC stands for antecedent, behavior, and consequence. Antecedent meaning what was happening first. I told the students to get out their math books. Behavior. Johnny threw his book across the room and crawled under the table and growled at me. All right, so we have a behavior. What was the consequence? I dragged Johnny out by his ankles, sat him in his chair, and told him he better do math anyway. I don't think that would work, would you? The teacher said I kept teaching, and Johnny came out from under the desk and began working. Maybe planned ignoring. Maybe Johnny just needed some calm down time. So the data that we take and the strategies that we use, these are all very important things. So again, when we're dealing with a lot of behavior situations and problems with kids in school, I ask the parents to get copies of the ABC data from the teacher. If the teacher is saying a student is having a lot of behavior problems, they should be taking data on it. All right, we can't solve these problems without data. So one of my case I went to recently, we had a student, a young student in a self-contained autistic class, and they were having a hard time during different parts of the day, and they would often get physical and hit other students or hit teachers. And the teacher was consistently saying, they just want their own way. He wants his own way. She wants her own way. Like, well, okay, newsflash, I want my own way too. So I guarantee every one of us want our own way, but we have to learn together. So let's talk about what that really means. And I says, well, give me an example of what's going on. So she says, well, so we use data from the ABC sheet. And we're like, okay, so when it's time for this child to come and do their seat work that they do, they go hit somebody. They'll run up to one of the teacher's aides and just whack them. I'm like, wow, okay, so what happens next? Well, then we take him to the quiet chair, and one of the teacher's aides will often do his deep pressure massage, because the OT said that deep pressure will help calm him down. So we put him in the quiet chair and we give him his deep pressure, and we don't talk to him while we're doing it. And we hope that that calms him down. I'm like, and then what happens? Oh, well, then we can usually get him over to his desk and he can do his work. So do you guys see what I saw in that situation? If I go hit Mrs. Jones, I'll get a break and a massage. That sounds like a pretty good deal to me. And then all of a sudden I saw it click on the rest of the team's face. So I'm like, yes, of course he wants his own way, except that you've actually conditioned him that if he has negative behavior, you'll reward him with what he wants. So I said, she's like, what do we do about it? You can't be hitting people. I'm like, oh, I agree. What if he wants a break and a massage, let's give that to him first. When it's time to do the seat work, can Mrs. Jones just go over to him and say, let's go sit in the quiet chair and have a break. Let's just do the deep pressure massage. No hitting necessary. Let's give him that break up front. He's telling us that he enjoys us. Maybe it helps him get calm and ready to work. So let's do that. Wow. All right. Sure enough, that worked. They started work time with a break and a massage. Who doesn't want that? And they were able to significantly reduce his hitting and his physically aggressive behavior when they realized that he was communicating with them what he really needed. Sometimes we would do things like that in advance so that he didn't have to hit. It had the great byproduct of decreasing hitting and other maladaptive behaviors. So anyway, this is all important stuff. Have you shared all available information with the IEP team? Did your student have evaluations at outside agencies? Have they been to Teach or any of the other autism centers across the state and had an evaluation? Those evaluations have recommendations. Um, have you get outside speech therapy, outside occupational therapy, all of those services, ABA therapy, all of those things come with different evaluations, recommendations, and data information that can be used to help provide the IEP team with more information about your child, about what works, about what doesn't work, about how you can help them. Ask who else should be included in this discussion. Is this something where you need one of the autism program specialists for your county? Do you need the exceptional children's director at your meeting? Has it reached that level where you need a higher level administrator involved? So anyway, think about who is available within the district that may be able to help the team understand your child's disability, understand special education, law, rules, policies, procedures. Sometimes those adding those individuals to a meeting can be very helpful in helping a team move forward. I tell parents all the time, you can pause, you can table an IEP meeting whenever you want to. I recommend this sort of be like the parachute or the emergency brake or some such thing, that you wouldn't do this carelessly. But if you find yourself in a meeting in which you feel very uncomfortable with the direction that it's going, and you find that you and the team may not be able to agree, the parent has the right to request that the meeting be tabled. The school has the right to request that as well. So a meeting can be tabled whenever whenever you feel like you're not going to be able to agree and continue. I had a parent in which the diagnosis of autism was still very new to them, and the school was talking about changes in placements and doing lots of things to help to support her son, but it was still a big change for mom, and mom became emotional, which is not an uncommon thing. And remember, our children are one of the most emotional things in our lives. We have probably the strongest feelings about our own children versus anyone else in the world. Um, so we tabled the meeting. Mom needed some time. She needed to go home and talk to dad. She needed time to review the report. She just needed time. And so we did. We tabled the meeting and we said, we will meet with you next week as soon as possible. Mom wants to bring dad with her to talk through these things. She's very nervous about making these decisions alone. This is all very new to her, and she needs time. So that's absolutely a reasonable thing to say. Can we table the meeting? I think we might need some more people here. Sometimes we table and say, let's come back with the EC director so she can provide clarification. Maybe we feel like the school doesn't understand the rules, rights, responsibilities. The EC director might be able to access other services in the county, provide other things. So these are all possibilities for IEP teams. If you feel like you can't agree, you can table the meeting. It's better than getting in a great big fight or leaning over the table and getting in someone's face or anything else. You want to table the meeting. You don't want to leave without a copy of everything, at least the minutes that have been developed this far. I'd never recommend storming out of a meeting. Because they actually, if you simply storm out of the meeting and say, I'm not doing this anymore, and walk out of the room, they are legally allowed to continue without you. If you need to table a meeting, you say, I would like to table this meeting. I need the minutes to reflect that I asked that the meeting be stopped, and I would like to leave with a copy of the minutes, please. So you may not need to say any more than that, but it's possible to do that. You should also assure the school that you will reschedule as soon as possible. You do not want to delay the process, but sometimes we do need more time, and it's okay to say that if you can't go further. So we talked about asking for a trial period. Try to identify the reason for the refusal or the resistance, and ask if the team can address that barrier. Again, this is where bringing other people in may be helpful. Make sure the discussion is accurately and thoroughly documented in writing. And remember, you can have another meeting when needed. Sometimes it takes a couple of meetings to get an IEP straightened out. So anyway, what if everything you have done to foster a good relationship with the school. You've kept logs, notes, and problem reports. You've sat in conferences and meetings, and your problem is still not solved. What do you do then? All right. This is your best tool. You guys recognize that? It's the Parents' Rights Handbook. All right, the cover may have changed a little bit since this picture was taken. It was updated recently in North Carolina. The rules, the federal laws have not changed at all. They simply adjusted the format in which it's laid out in. They tried to make it more parent friendly, and they tried to add explanations of rules, policies, and procedures to make them more understandable to parents. So the wording of the law is still in place. The wording of the law has not been changed by one period, comma, exclamation point, period, but they tried to make it more friendly. If you haven't cracked open your Parents' Rights Handbook, it's a great time to do so. It is required by law that they at least offer an IEP, a Parents' Rights Handbook at every single meeting, and they need to document. If you have many copies and you don't need more, it's fine to not take more. It's fine to say, I already have a copy. They will document that you already have a copy and you did not take another one. But it is required under federal law that they offer you a copy of the Parents' Rights Handbook. All right. So there is a process for dispute resolution if nothing else has worked. All right, and so this is taken straight from the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction website regarding dispute resolution. All right, any person who has a concern about the education of a student with a disability can raise the issue in one of several ways. For example, it is always appropriate to discuss the matter with a student's teacher or principal at the local school. It is also helpful to contact the Director of Exceptional Children's Program and the central office of the school system, charter school, or state-operated program. The Exceptional Children's Division's consultants for dispute resolution and consultants for instructional support and related services are also available to offer consultation to assist parents, advocates, or school systems or charter schools or state-operated programs personnel who request help with problem solving. That's another question I get from time to time is, are charter schools public schools? Yes. A charter school is a public school. They have to follow IEPs and do all of the same things that traditional public schools have to do. Private schools are private. They're not public schools. They do not have to follow IEPs. Private schools are a whole different ballgame. A private school does not have to follow an IEP. A charter school does. A charter school is a public school that is privately operated. A little bit confusing, won't get into it more than that, but just know that a charter school is still a public school, is still bound by federal law. Consultants at the Department of Public Instruction are neutral and refrain from taking sides when there is a disagreement, but consistently advocate for appropriate services for children with disabilities. They are committed to the protection of rights for children with disabilities and their parents. So there are people that you can contact at the Department of Public Instruction if you feel like you have done everything you can to work things out with your child's school and you feel you're not getting the services that are in their IEP or that they need in order to receive a free and appropriate education. So one form of resolving a dispute is a facilitated meeting. When parents or school representatives are apprehensive about the next meeting, maybe there was a big fallout at the previous meeting, maybe things got heated, maybe it's been very difficult to come to an agreement with the school, or it's a complex meeting with numerous participants and communication has become tense. An impartial facilitator can be requested to assist the IEP team members in communicating more effectively, keeping the focus on student outcomes and developing compliant IEPs. All right. So a facilitator is a lot like a referee. They do not work for the Department of Public Instruction or the school districts. They are independent contractors who are trained in the special education laws, rules, and procedures, and they guide the team through the process, much like a referee guides athletes through a game. If there is something that doesn't fall within the rules, they will point this out. They will provide information and support on the appropriate rules or procedures, and they will move forward. They're very good at documenting the meeting, decisions that were made, who will be responsible for next steps, etc. So if you find yourself in a really tough situation, a facilitated meeting may be helpful in getting everyone to play together. These are often very long meetings. They are often very thorough, but I feel like they are a good option when the two sides have really reached an impasse and are very frustrated. Everyone is very well behaved at a facilitated IEP meeting. That facilitator keeps tight reins on everyone, and they make sure that all of the concerns are addressed and that a plan is made to move forward. So that's certainly one of your rights. Again, I've pretty much just told you guys, these guys, who the facilitators are. They're not advocates. They're not IEP team members. They are not able to make a decision, give an opinion. They are really just there to facilitate the meeting and give information to the team so that the team can make the best decision. The facilitators plan the meeting process in partnership with several parties. They'll talk to the school, they'll talk to the parents about what the concerns are. They set a positive tone, they clarify the purpose of the meeting so that we know exactly what needs to be accomplished in the meeting and we're not just going back to the same fight that maybe we had last time. But they encourage everyone to participate and make sure that enough information is available for the team to use. So again, they truly are facilitators in trying to make a productive meeting happen and keeping everybody on track and in their lane if need be. You do have the right to file a formal complaint if there is a violation of special education law. All right. A formal complaint is an official allegation that a law is not being by a local school. To file a formal complaint, you would contact the Department of Public Instruction. So you're filing a complaint against the district. It's not just against the teacher or the principal, it's against the school district where your child is enrolled, saying that they are not providing services the child needs or they're not providing services that are addressed in the IEP, but it's specifically for violations of federal education law, IDEA law, right? They aren't following steps in the BIP. They're supposed to be getting this service and they can't, and they're refusing to address it in any other way. All right. Sometimes there are other situations in which a student is mistreated by a school district, which is heartbreaking and unfortunate. But that is not a violation of special education law. That's a violation of other laws. So the Department of Public Instruction, if your teacher is grabbing your child or putting bruises on them or just any other number of things, I don't want to plant fears in anyone's head, but you all have seen them and know them. The Department of Public Instruction doesn't address those things. Those are handled either by the principal or within the school district, or God forbid, even with the local police departments. All right. So I just want to be clear that you guys understand that the Department of Public Instruction and formal complaints is when there is a problem with special education law in the implementation of the IEP. This is what you can file a formal complaint about. There are other very valid complaints under other domains, but the Department of Public Instruction is not able to do anything about those things. They can simply direct you to appropriate agencies or support people to help you deal with that. So again, formal complaints are for violations of special education law. All right. So what I do like to remind you is that no matter what the outcome is, one of the most important things is to say thank you. I love this quote by Maya Angelou that says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said and that people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." All right. And I think that that's one of the most important things. Even if you've had a stressful meeting, even if it really got tough, or maybe you even, lost your cool a couple of times, sending a note to each of those people on the IEP team. Thank you for meeting with me today. Thank you for everything you're doing to try to help my child. I hope that we can, work together in the future. But thank you notes go a long way. And you're doing this on behalf of your child. So anyway, I just want to remind you that probably saying thank you, whether good or bad, is one of the most important things in terms of moving the situation forward, advocating well for your child. There are some links, and these will be in the handout that I'm about to send you in terms of resources for special education, disputes, special education law. I highly recommend the book by Pam and Pete Wright, the attorney that I quoted earlier, called From Emotions to Advocacy. We have webinars on our website. There's another one specific to IEP that covers different aspects than I discussed today. We also have toolkits on our website that, again, cover IEPs, behavior intervention plans, and even issues related to transitioning to adulthood. So again, I recommend that you look those up. My favorite way to find them, if you can't remember the web address, is to Google Autism Society NC, and then either webinars or toolkits at the end of that. It's usually the first search result, so that's my trick for finding them. So anyway, this concludes our presentation, and I want to thank you all for joining us today.